He never expected his first day at an elite school to turn into a nightmare. Humiliated by his teacher, laughed at by his classmates, until he revealed a shocking truth that left everyone frozen. What happens when the one they bullied turns out to be more powerful than they ever imagined? Stay tuned to find out. Lucas Morrison adjusted his backpack and took a deep breath before stepping through the towering gates of Bellevue Academy. The pristine white buildings, the neatly trimmed hedges, and the polished floors all screamed wealth and prestige. It was a place meant for the children of senators, CEOs, and high-ranking officials. And now, somehow, for him. As he walked through the bustling hallways, he could feel the eyes on him. He wasn't like the others. His deep brown skin and modest clothing made him stand out among the designer suits, expensive sneakers, and polished appearances of his classmates. "New kid," someone muttered as he passed. "Looks like he's on a scholarship," another voice whispered. Lucas ignored them, keeping his head high. He had earned his place here. His grades were impeccable, his test scores unmatched. But as he stepped into his first class of the day, literature, he quickly realized that none of that would matter. The moment he took a seat, the teacher, Mrs. Crawford, fixed her icy blue eyes on him. "Oh, you must be Mr. Morrison," she said, drawing out his last name as if tasting something sour. "Didn't expect to see a scholarship student in my class." A few chuckles rippled through the room. Lucas clenched his jaw but said nothing. Mrs. Crawford walked to the front of the class, flipping through a book. "Literature is a subject of refinement, of deep analysis," she continued. "It requires intelligence, discipline, and most importantly, culture. Some of you may find it challenging." Her eyes landed on Lucas again. "Tell me, Mr. Morrison," she said, tapping the book with her perfectly manicured nails. "Do you have any experience with classic literature? Or is your reading experience limited to urban fiction?" The room erupted in laughter. Lucas felt his face burn, but he refused to give her the satisfaction of reacting. "I've read Shakespeare, Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Baldwin," he said evenly. Mrs. Crawford raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting an answer. "Oh," she said mockingly. "Then perhaps you'd like to analyze the meaning of J. Gatsby's ambition for the class?" Lucas took a deep breath. He knew the Great Gatsby inside and out. "Gatsby's ambition is fueled by an unattainable dream," he said. "He believes wealth and status will bring him happiness, but his desire for Daisy is an illusion. He builds his entire life around something that was never real in the first place." Silence. The laughter died down. A few students even looked impressed. But Mrs. Crawford's lips curled into a cold smile. "Not bad," she said. "For someone like you." Lucas's stomach twisted, but before he could say anything, the bell rang. As he gathered his things, he heard one of the students whisper to another. "He won't last here." Lucas clenched his fists. They were wrong. He would last. And he would prove every single one of them wrong. The hallway buzzed with energy as students flooded out of their classrooms, their conversations blending into a steady hum of laughter, gossip, and the occasional boast about weekend trips to private islands or VIP events. Lucas kept his head down, gripping the straps of his backpack a little tighter. His first class had been worse than he expected. Not only was Mrs. Crawford openly hostile toward him, but his classmates seemed to feed off of her condescension, as if her approval gave them permission to treat him like an outsider. He made his way toward his locker, trying to block out the whispers and stares. Just as he was about to open it, a sharp voice called out from behind him. "Hey, scholarship boy." Lucas turned, already recognizing the sneer in the voice. Andrew Hall. He had noticed him in class earlier, tall, blond, dressed in designer clothes from head to toe. Everything about him screamed entitlement. "You're in my way," Andrew said, stepping closer. His voice was calm, almost lazy, but there was a clear undertone of amusement, like he was enjoying himself. Lucas glanced at the row of lockers. His wasn't even near Andrew's. "You've got the wrong one," Lucas said flatly and turned back to his locker. He barely had time to react before he felt a sharp shove against his shoulder. He staggered back a step, his backpack nearly slipping from his grip. A few students nearby paused to watch, their eyes glinting with anticipation. Andrew smirked. "You must be new, so let me explain how things work around here. This school isn't for everyone." He gestured around dramatically. "And guys like you? You don't last long." Lucas felt his pulse quicken, but he forced himself to stay calm. He knew Andrew wanted a reaction. Wanted him to lash out, to give everyone an excuse to label him as aggressive. Instead, he took a deep breath. "Funny," he said. "I thought this school was for the best students. I guess I must be in the right place after all." A few students chuckled, clearly entertained by Lucas's defiance. Andrew's smirk faltered for a second before he recovered, stepping even closer. "You don't get it, do you?" he said, his voice dropping lower. "You're a joke here. No one cares how smart you are. You'll always be beneath us." Lucas felt the weight of those words, but before he could respond, another voice cut in. "That's enough, Andrew." Both of them turned. A boy with messy dark hair and sharp green eyes stood a few feet away, arms crossed over his chest. Elliot Carter. Lucas had noticed him earlier too. He had been sitting a few seats away in class, quiet but observant. Unlike the others, he hadn't laughed at Mrs. Crawford's comments. Now, he was standing between Lucas and Andrew, looking completely unfazed by the confrontation. Andrew rolled his eyes. "Stay out of this, Carter." Elliot shrugged. "Or what? You'll cry to your daddy?" His voice was light, almost bored, but the jab hit its mark. A few students snickered. Andrew's jaw tightened, his confidence slipping for the first time. He shot Lucas one last glare before stepping back. "This isn't over," he muttered before walking off, his entourage trailing behind him. Lucas exhaled slowly, his body still tense. He turned to Elliot. "Thanks," he said cautiously. Elliot smirked. "Don't thank me yet. Hall's the type that doesn't let things go. He'll come after you again." Lucas nodded. "I figured." Elliot studied him for a moment, then extended a hand. "You any good at basketball?" Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Why?" Elliot grinned. "Because if you're gonna survive Bellevue, you're gonna need allies. And the best way to get them? Prove you belong." Lucas hesitated, then shook his hand. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he thought. Lucas had barely settled into his seat for literature class the next morning when Mrs. Crawford's voice rang out across the room. "Mr. Morrison," she called, her sharp tone making it clear this wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. Lucas looked up, already bracing himself. "I was reviewing yesterday's participation," she continued, tapping a red pen against her desk. "And I noticed that your contributions, while enthusiastic, lacked depth. I'm not sure if you're aware, but we hold a certain standard here at Bellevue. Do you think you're meeting that standard?" A few quiet chuckles echoed from the back of the room. Andrew, of course, was among them, smirking as he leaned back in his chair. Lucas kept his expression neutral. "I thought I answered your question about Gatsby pretty well." Mrs. Crawford pursed her lips. "Well isn't good enough," she said smoothly. "But I'll give you an opportunity to improve. Let's have a pop quiz, shall we?" Groans filled the room, but Lucas knew this wasn't about testing the class, it was about testing him. Mrs. Crawford walked to the whiteboard and scribbled 3 essay-style questions. Analyze the role of social class in The Great Gatsby. How does Fitzgerald use symbolism to critique the American dream? Compare and contrast Gatsby's obsession with Daisy to another classic literary character. You have 15 minutes, she announced, setting the timer. Begin. Lucas exhaled slowly, gripping his pen. The questions weren't difficult, he had read The Great Gatsby twice before. But he knew that no matter what he wrote, Mrs. Crawford would find a way to tear it apart. He focused, quickly outlining his thoughts. He wrote about the rigid class structure in the novel, about Gatsby's mansion as a false promise of success, about how Gatsby's love for Daisy mirrored Heathcliff's obsession with Catherine in Wuthering Heights, both driven by longing, both doomed from the start. The timer buzzed. Pens down, Mrs. Crawford instructed. She moved through the rows, collecting the papers. When she reached Lucas's desk, she plucked his quiz from his hands and skimmed it. A flicker of something passed over her face, surprise? Annoyance? But it was gone in an instant. She turned back to the front of the room, her heels clicking against the tile floor. I'll grade these tonight, she said. But some of you may want to prepare for disappointment. Her eyes lingered on Lucas. As soon as class ended, Elliot caught up with him in the hallway. That was a setup, he said, stuffing his hands into his pockets. She's out to get you. Lucas nodded. I figured. Doesn't matter what you wrote, Elliot continued. She's gonna mark you down, no matter what. Lucas clenched his jaw. He had worked too hard to let someone like Mrs. Crawford decide his worth. I guess we'll see, he said. That evening, Lucas sat at his desk in his dorm, staring at the ceiling. He knew tomorrow wouldn't bring good news. It wasn't just about academics, Mrs. Crawford wanted to make a point. But he wasn't going to let her win. Not without a fight. The next morning, Lucas walked into literature class with his head high, but his stomach twisted in knots. He knew what was coming. The air in the room felt heavier than usual, filled with the quiet anticipation of students waiting for drama to unfold. Mrs. Crawford stood at the front of the room, shuffling through a neat stack of graded quizzes. Her expression was unreadable, but Lucas knew better than to expect fairness. Before we begin today's discussion, she announced, I've graded your pop quizzes from yesterday. As expected, most of you performed adequately, but some of you clearly need to reconsider whether they belong in this class. She made a slow show of passing back the papers, placing each one carefully on students' desks. Lucas kept his eyes on her, waiting. When she finally reached him, she hesitated just long enough for a few nearby students to take notice. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she placed his quiz on his desk, a large red C marked at the top. A couple of students snickered. Lucas felt his pulse quicken, but he forced himself to stay calm. I must say, Mr. Morrison, Mrs. Crawford mused, crossing her arms, I expected more from you. For someone who claimed to know so much about The Great Gatsby, your analysis was disappointing. Lucas stared at the grade. He knew his work had been solid. He had read the novel multiple times, dissected every theme, every symbol. There was no way his response deserved a C-. His grip tightened on the edges of the paper, but he stayed quiet. What was wrong with my answers? He asked finally, his voice even. Mrs. Crawford tilted her head, feigning sympathy. It wasn't your answers, Mr. Morrison. It was your lack of depth. Your arguments lacked refinement. Literature is about more than just summarizing, it's about insight. Perhaps you haven't been taught to think that way before. Lucas caught the subtle emphasis in her words. She wasn't just critiquing his paper. She was implying something deeper, that someone like him wasn't capable of deeper analysis. His jaw clenched. Before he could speak, another voice cut in. That's funny, Elliot said from across the room, leaning back in his chair. Because I read Lucas's response, and it was better than mine. And I got a B+. The room went silent. A few heads turned toward Elliot, curious. Mrs. Crawford's lips pressed into a thin line. Mr. Carter, are you questioning my grading? I'm just saying it's interesting, Elliot replied. Since we made some of the same points. But sure, maybe I just had more refinement. His tone was casual, but the weight of his words wasn't lost on anyone. Mrs. Crawford's expression hardened. Grades are final, she said curtly. If anyone has a problem with theirs, they're welcome to schedule a meeting after school. Lucas knew that was a trap. A private meeting would accomplish nothing. If anything, it would give her more power to dismiss him without witnesses. He exhaled slowly, then did something that surprised even himself. He smiled. "Thank you for the feedback," he said smoothly, slipping the quiz into his folder. "I'll be sure to improve next time." Mrs. Crawford narrowed her eyes slightly, as if she had expected him to snap back. But Lucas wasn't about to give her that satisfaction. Instead, he would play the long game. He wasn't going to argue for respect. He was going to prove that he deserved it. After class, Elliot caught up with him in the hallway. "You're really just gonna let that go?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Lucas smirked. "No. But I'm not gonna waste my time fighting a battle I can't win yet." Elliot studied him for a second, then grinned. "All right, Morrison. I like your style." Lucas knew he had to be smart. If Mrs. Crawford wanted him to fail, he wouldn't give her the chance. He just needed a plan. And he knew exactly where to start. Lucas knew that if he wanted to fight back against Mrs. Crawford's bias, he had to be strategic. Complaining wouldn't work. Asking for a regrade would be pointless. He needed evidence, something undeniable. So that evening, he sat at his dorm room desk, flipping through his graded quiz with careful precision. He compared it to Elliot's, which his friend had let him borrow. As he suspected, their answers were similar, sometimes nearly identical in structure, but Elliot's had received a B+, while Lucas had been given a C-. It wasn't a mistake. It was intentional. Still, he needed more than just one instance. If he was going to prove that Mrs. Crawford was unfairly grading him, he needed a pattern. So he came up with a plan. The next day, Lucas walked into class with his game face on. He took his seat, ignored Andrew's smug glances, and focused. Mrs. Crawford would never expect him to fight back subtly. She thought he would either give up or lash out, but he planned to do neither. When she handed out a new assignment, an essay on the catcher in the rye, Lucas acted fast. "Hey, Elliot," he murmured, keeping his voice low. "Let's run a little experiment." Elliot arched an eyebrow. "I like experiments." "What kind?" Lucas smirked. "We'll write the same essay. Same points. Same arguments. Just worded slightly differently." Elliot caught on instantly. "And see if she grades them the same." "Exactly." Elliot's grin widened. "Now this? This is genius." Over the next few days, Lucas worked harder than ever. He poured everything into the essay, sharp analysis, deep insight, flawless structure. He made sure his arguments were as refined as possible, leaving no room for critique. When Elliot finished his version, they cross-checked their papers, ensuring they were nearly identical in thought and quality. If Mrs. Crawford was grading fairly, their scores should be identical, or at least close. But if Lucas's suspicion was right. A week later, when Mrs. Crawford handed back their papers, Lucas didn't even have to look at his grade to know what had happened. The moment she placed the paper on his desk, he saw the big, red C. Then, from the corner of his eye, he watched as Elliot flipped his over. A dash. Lucas let the weight of it settle. It wasn't shocking, but it was proof. Mrs. Crawford had been watching him closely, probably expecting a reaction. Lucas could feel her gaze, waiting for him to challenge her, to make a scene. Instead, he did something that threw her off completely. He smiled. "Everything good?" Elliot whispered, barely able to hide his amusement. "Better than good," Lucas murmured. "Now we have her." Elliot grinned. Time to go public? Lucas nodded. It was time to expose the truth. Lucas had the proof he needed, but now came the hard part, making people listen. Bellevue Academy wasn't the kind of school where students questioned authority. The teachers here weren't just educators, they were gatekeepers of privilege. Complaints against them were rare, and when they did happen, they usually went nowhere. Lucas knew that if he wanted to take down Mrs. Crawford's unfair treatment, he needed to be smart, strategic, and undeniable. So he went to the one place where truth could spread fast, social media. That evening, in his dorm room, Lucas and Elliot sat across from each other, their laptops open. "You sure about this?" Elliot asked. Lucas nodded. "If I don't do this, she'll keep getting away with it. And not just with me. Who knows how many other students she's done this to?" Elliot smirked. "All right, Morrison. Let's blow this thing up." They started by scanning their essays again, side by side. Lucas made a simple graphic comparison. Elliot's essay, A, strong analysis, insightful connections, well-structured argument. Lucas's essay, C, weak analysis, lacking depth, poor structure. Underneath, he wrote, both essays argued the same points. Same structure. Same depth. So why the difference in grades? Then, he uploaded pictures of both graded essays, highlighting identical passages where Mrs. Crawford had praised Elliot but criticized Lucas for the same points. Elliot took it a step further, recording a short video where he explained the situation. "This is what bias looks like," Elliot said in the clip. "Same work, different grade. And it's not the first time she's done this." Lucas hesitated before hitting post. Once this was out there was no going back. He took a deep breath. Then, with a click, the post went live. The response was immediate. By the next morning, the post had hundreds of shares from students, both inside and outside of Bellevue. People commented, tagged friends, and told their own stories of unfair treatment. By lunchtime, it was all anyone was talking about. "She's been doing this for years," one student wrote. "My brother had her, and he said she always graded the Black and Hispanic students lower than everyone else." Another comment read, "Finally. Someone is calling her out." Even students who had never spoken to Lucas were whispering about it in the hallways. It was too big to ignore. And by the time he walked into literature class that afternoon, he could see it all over Mrs. Crawford's face. She knew. She froze when she saw him, gripping her desk a little tighter than usual. For the first time, she looked nervous. She cleared her throat. "We will not discuss baseless accusations in this classroom," she said, voice clipped. "Some of you have chosen to spread lies on social media, and I assure you, there will be consequences." Lucas stared her down. "Then why not prove us wrong?" he asked. His voice was calm, steady. "You could show the school my essay and Elliot's. Let people decide for themselves." A long, heavy silence settled over the room. Mrs. Crawford's lips thinned, but she said nothing. Because they both knew, she couldn't. For the first time, Lucas wasn't the one on trial. She was. And everyone was watching. The fallout was immediate. By the next morning, Lucas could feel the weight of what he had done. Everyone at Bellevue Academy was talking about it. It wasn't just whispers anymore, people were openly debating in the hallways, at lunch, even in other classes. Some students supported him. "She's been doing this for years," one girl said in the cafeteria. "I remember my older brother telling me how she used to fail students for no reason." Others weren't so convinced. "Maybe his essay just wasn't that good," Andrew sneered during break. "Not everything is about race." Lucas ignored him. He wasn't interested in arguing, he was interested in justice. And justice, it seemed, was finally catching up with Mrs. Crawford. By third period, Lucas was called to the principal's office. Mr. Reynolds, the school's head administrator, sat behind his massive oak desk, his fingers laced together as he studied Lucas. Mrs. Crawford sat to the side, looking composed, but the slight twitch in her jaw gave away her tension. "You've caused quite a stir, young man," Mr. Reynolds said finally. Lucas didn't blink. "I told the truth." Mr. Reynolds sighed. "Do you have any idea how damaging this is? Accusing a teacher of bias without solid evidence." "I do have evidence," Lucas cut in, meeting his gaze. "You saw the essays. You saw the grades. How do you explain that?" Mr. Reynolds glanced at Mrs. Crawford, who remained silent. Lucas pressed forward. "This isn't just about me. Look at the student records. I guarantee you'll find a pattern." A flicker of something passed over Mr. Reynolds' face, hesitation. Mrs. Crawford finally spoke. "I have always graded with fairness and integrity," she said smoothly. "I will not sit here and be falsely accused by a student who simply didn't perform well enough." Lucas let out a short laugh. "So it's just a coincidence that Elliot and I wrote nearly the same essay, but he got an A and I got a C?" Silence. Then, a knock at the door. The secretary peeked in. "Sir, there's been a development. You may want to check the school's social media page." Mr. Reynolds frowned, pulling out his phone. His eyes scanned the screen, and his expression darkened. Lucas already knew what it was. After Lucas and Elliot had posted their evidence, other students had come forward. Dozens of students, past and present, shared stories about unfair grading, about being singled out, about the small, cutting comments Mrs. Crawford had made over the years. The post had gone viral. The school's reputation was now at stake. Mr. Reynolds inhaled sharply and put his phone down. "Mrs. Crawford," he said, his voice clipped, "I believe we need to conduct a formal investigation." For the first time, real panic flickered across Mrs. Crawford's face. "Sir, I assure you." He held up a hand. "We'll be reviewing your grading history immediately. Until then, I think it's best if you take a temporary leave." Lucas watched as Mrs. Crawford's entire world shifted in front of her. She had never been questioned before. Never been challenged. Now, for the first time, she was the one being held accountable. Lucas stood, his heart pounding. He had done it. He had won. The news spread like wildfire. By the next morning, Mrs. Crawford was gone. No official announcement was made, but everyone knew. Her classroom sat empty, the door locked. Some students whispered that she had been fired, others said she had been forced to resign. Either way, she wasn't coming back. Lucas walked through the halls with his head held high. For the first time since he had arrived at Bellevue Academy, he felt something different: respect. Some students nodded at him as he passed. A few even stopped to thank him. "I had her last year," one junior admitted. "She always gave me lower grades, no matter how hard I worked. I just thought I wasn't smart enough." Another student, a senior girl, sighed. "I wish I had spoken up." "You had the courage to do what no one else did." Lucas realized then that this fight hadn't just been about him. It had been about every student who had ever been made to feel less than they were. Later that afternoon, he found Elliot waiting for him outside the gym. "Well," Elliot said with a grin, "I'd say that's a pretty satisfying ending." Lucas laughed. "Not an ending," he corrected. "Just a new beginning." Elliot clapped him on the back. "So what's next, Morrison? You taking down the entire system now?" Lucas smirked. "Not yet. First, I've got a basketball game to win." That evening, under the bright lights of the school's basketball court, Lucas stepped onto the court with his team. The stands were packed, more than usual. As he glanced at the crowd, he saw familiar faces. Students who had once laughed at him. Students who had ignored him. Now, they were cheering for him. Elliot jogged up beside him. Ready to prove you belong? Lucas smiled, bouncing the ball once before passing it. I already did. The referee blew the whistle. The game began. And Lucas played like a champion. Because he wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for every person who had ever been told they weren't good enough. And tonight? He was proving them all wrong. This story isn't just about one student taking down an unfair teacher, it's about resilience, justice, and the power of standing up for what's right. Lucas could have stayed silent. He could have let the system break him, accepted the bias, and faded into the background. But instead, he chose to fight back, not with anger or reckless defiance, but with strategy, intelligence, and undeniable proof. His victory wasn't just about getting Mrs. Crawford removed, it was about changing the culture of Bellevue Academy. It was about showing other students that they had a voice, that they didn't have to accept mistreatment, and that even in a system designed to push them down, they could still rise. What makes this story so powerful is that it reflects real-world struggles. There are countless people like Lucas, talented, hardworking, and underestimated because of where they come from, how they look, or what others assume about them. But Lucas's story is a reminder that truth is stronger than bias, that evidence is more powerful than opinions, and that the only way to create change is to have the courage to speak up. And in the end, Lucas didn't just prove he belonged. He proved that he was unstoppable.